The grotesque, thoughtful, and abstract sci-fi film The Platform raised a lot of discussion upon its timely 2020 release. With its sequel now streaming, it's hard not to notice new details in the original with fresh eyes. When The Platform hit Netflix worldwide in March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic was in full swing, and months of quarantining were still ahead. The film hit with a particular amount of force back then due to the way that it spoke to the general feeling of isolation that we were all having to deal with in those days. Seeing Goring get gradually used to the reality of a confinement he thought would be much easier to deal with, fret over provisions, and slowly lose his mind felt eerily familiar. In 2024, the experience of watching the movie has been transformed by circumstances. Now, although COVID-19 is still very much a pressing public health concern in many parts of the world, we've spent nearly 3 years getting used to going outside again, and the claustrophobia of The Platform has taken on a new connotation. Instead of reflecting the public's current circumstances, the movie takes us back to the state of mind we were once in. Given how challenging the return to normal life has been for many, it's now easy to recognize oneself in that final scene, with Goring wandering in the dark, unsure of where he's going or what he should do now that he's no longer trapped. It's no secret that inequality is still one of the world's great ills in 2024. The various crises of late-stage capitalism that humanity has faced in the past few decades are almost too complex and mind-boggling to fully grasp. But what remains unmistakable through and through is that the poor stay poor and the rich keep getting richer. That was one of the reasons The Platform struck a nerve in 2020, and this also explains the success of other hit films from that era. Another example is Parasite, which rode a wave of enormous crossover popularity all the way to Best Picture Oscar win just a few weeks before the Netflix premiere of The Platform. To put it lightly, the intervening years have not made the class metaphor less potent. According to Oxfam, inequality around the world has increased since the pandemic. For a lot of the working class, life feels increasingly like a series of fights for scraps from the top, while the wealthy hoard power and resources and gorge shamelessly on more than they need.
The ones responsible for your death will be the ones above us. Up above, there are 340 people you know.
Even the ongoing shrinking of the middle class adds extra poignancy to the film's depiction of the people on levels 10 to 50 as self-important pigs in a pen, feeling superior to the people below, even while scraping meat off chicken bones left over by those above.
On those high levels, you can eat whatever you want, but you don't have anything to wait for.
Back when The Platform came out, the concept of generative AI was still a long way away from its current boom. A lot of the discourse has been around AI replacing writers, filmmakers, and artists, but there's also the fact that its arrival has sent emissions at tech companies through the roof. Not only do AI data centers emit a lot of carbon, but they also consume a lot of water for cooling. Specialists have raised concerns about the world's ecosystems not being able to sustain the ongoing AI frenzy at its current pace if computation stays at its current level of energy efficiency. Watching The Platform now, you can't help but notice that the critique of waste and individualism doesn't seem limited to class warfare in and of itself. There's now an unmistakable environmental slant to the film's insistence that selfishness in managing the world's resources will result in scarcity, chaos, and suffering. The consumer benefits offered by large language models have launched untold amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, contributing to the disturbance of our world's delicate climate balance. To its credit, The Platform acknowledges that individualist classism is intertwined with other forms of bigotry. Early on, while telling the story of how he wound up in the pit by throwing a TV out the window and accidentally dropping it on an undocumented immigrant, Drew complains that his arrest was unfair because the person he killed was an immigrant.
Now you tell me, am I responsible? He shouldn't even have been there.
This revelation shows that his lack of solidarity and his hostility towards other humans were already in place well before his sentence. Later, the couple on level 5 proves racist and xenophobic in their treatment of Borat, openly expressing suspicion due to him being black and demanding that he proves he's Christian in order to indulge his pleas for help. However, despite these nods, the movie doesn't really explore racism as deeply as it could. Trimagasi is still depicted as a bearer of some measure of wisdom and even morality through his imaginary mentor role in Goring's Psyche. In a world that has only seen white nationalist politics and rhetoric grow louder and more aggressive since 2020, the film's subtle depiction doesn't feel incisive enough. Racial and ethnic politics aren't just a subtle detail in the grand scheme of class warfare, they're a central piece of the puzzle. Whatever your ultimate takeaway from it may be, it's hard to disagree that The Platform is a cynical film. From beginning to end, it could be argued that the movie operates under the general belief that humans are fundamentally selfish and incapable of solidarity or collaboration. Even when Goring and Barahat set out to disprove that idea and instill some sense of collectivism in people, it doesn't work. And what little they manage to preserve of the food as they descend to the lower levels is only salvaged through violence. The message that people suck spoke to a lot of us during the pandemic, which exposed a lot of selfish behavior at supermarkets supermarkets, and beyond. A lot of people fail to band together in solidarity and work toward the common good.
Hunger will drive you mad. And down here, it's better to eat than to be eaten.
But now, a few years later, cynicism about fellow humans stuck in the same situation feels more unhelpful than anything. Yes, people can and often do suck, but we have to stick together and hang on to the specks of generosity and collectivism that humankind has displayed in the past as evidence that it is possible to do so. The platform is not a subtle film. It practically explains itself to you, and Trimagasi lays out the rules of the pit with the patience of an IMDb plot summary, pausing at appropriate times to make sure both Goreng and the audience understand the sociological implications of the pit's mechanics. As metaphors go, it doesn't get more plain and self-explanatory than the people above get all the food while the people below get fewer and fewer scraps. The point of the film is not nuance or delicacy, no pun intended. It's unapologetically blunt.
In the pit, everyone is free to behave however they want.
That's not in itself a bad thing. In fact, in 2024, it may be a very good thing. These days, popular films that tackle social issues are throwing subtlety to the wind and opting to wear their messages on their sleeve. Barbie sprang for a monologue on sexism that took 2 full days to shoot. Saltburn and The Menu exploded class warfare into garish extremes. And Glass Onion was even more direct and clear in its satire than Knives Out. 2024's The Substance blew social media open like a powder keg by eschewing any trace of subtlety in its send-up of the beauty industry. With the world getting more nightmarishly absurd by the day, subtlety in art just might be losing its luster as a way to reflect how we're all living and feeling. The mysterious woman who keeps descending the pit every month in search of her child plays a substantial role in the plot of the platform, despite the fact that she barely speaks throughout the duration of the film. Sadly, she belongs to the troubled tradition of silent or near-silent Asian characters in Western media. These characters, which can also sometimes be men but are often a female-specific trope, all share general archetypal characteristics. They're stern, stoic, charismatic, lethally efficient in combat, and emotionally opaque. Their lack of speech reflects long-standing Western stereotypes about East Asians, and especially East Asian women being quiet and reserved. More often than not, it also reflects a lack of a fully developed personality, which in turn speaks to a writer's desire to incorporate a certain cool Asian assassin aesthetic without knowing how to imagine rich inner lives for Asian women. Mulan's Jimmy Wong brought the issue up on X not long after the platform came out, writing, "Least favorite thing I've noticed during pandemic binge watching? Incredibly sexy and good-looking Asian actors playing characters with barely any dialogue because it's supposed to be mysterious?" Looking back on the platform now, the unabashed stereotyping feels even more trite and dated than it already did in 2020. More than just a vehicle for blunt and effective messages about the insanity of wealth inequality, the platform is a searing audio-visual experience full of memorable touches of gruesomeness and horror. The imagery of enormous amounts of food being gorged on, for instance, is disgustingly transfixing. In 2020, part of that transfixing appeal was tied to mukbang videos, a cultural phenomenon that was then at its arguable peak. These videos, in which people consume enormous amounts of food on camera for viewers' entertainment, began an upswing of international popularity around the mid-2010s. By the time the platform was released, the iconography of mukbangers hunched over obscenely plentiful meal tables was already seared into the minds of millions around the globe. 2024, meanwhile, is a different time for mukbang videos. As a genre emerged into the mainstream, it also began to face increased scrutiny from politicians, the public, and the media. Nutrition specialists have accused mukbangers of promoting unhealthy eating habits. In fact, China has banned them for contributing to food waste, and a prominent mukbang star named Nikocado Avocado broke the internet by revealing he'd spent 2 years posting pre-recorded videos or secretly losing weight. Now the film's mukbang-adjacent images feel strangely ahead of their time in their grotesque, foreboding gloom. Part of the reason the platform became a cultural phenomenon in 2020 was its simplicity. We never learn the exact details of who built the pit, why, where it's located, what function it fulfills, or what has become of society around it. Even the ending of the platform is quite open, with Goreng merely sending the girl up and walking off into the dark without knowing where he is or where he's going. In a world where nearly all mainstream movies feel the need to over-explain themselves, the lack of clear answers or explanations added greatly to the mystique. It was a movie that left fans scratching their heads in the best way.
She's the message.
She is the message.
While that opacity felt thrilling at the time, it seems inevitable now that it couldn't stand. A hit like The Platform couldn't remain cryptic and self-contained under the current streaming economy. It had to be solved, and that's where The Platform 2 comes in. The film goes back to the early days of the pit and fills us in on some of the details that The Platform deliberately left out, including confirmation of the oft-floated fan theory that each inmate was only supposed to eat their favorite food. What it doesn't offer is an equally engaging movie, which was to be expected. Rewatching The Platform now, it's clear that a sequel was always going to be redundant, and that additional information would only shortchange the original's fable-like power. The distribution of wealth and resources is not the only thing that the titular platform and its daily banquets can stand for in the platform. Sure, that's the most intuitive interpretation, but in 2024, there's another reading that's just as feasible. The powers in charge of the pit can be seen as a metaphor for how some streaming services treat subscribers. They send down whatever to the inmates in hopes that they will eat it without complaint, expecting them to munch on calories indiscriminately as long as it keeps them fed.
The food is only ours while the platform is on our level.
The years since 2020 have taught us a lot about the underside of the streaming economy and its tendency to treat movies and TV shows like content, to be smashed indiscriminately into eyeballs. The bubble burst during the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike, which revealed that the entire streaming model hinges on consumer inertia, passive viewing, and the offering of just enough entertainment to keep the subscription fees flowing. It's hilariously ironic that this huge streaming hit is about an organization presenting slop to people, knowing that even if they don't particularly enjoy it, they'll consume it all the same.